Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something our sources call data theater.
Right. It's this institutional practice of dressing up old biases, gut feelings,
Yeah.
all the old ways of doing things, and presenting them as brand new objective data.
It's almost like a magic trick played with spreadsheets.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And our mission today is to really analyze how this sleight of hand works, specifically in these high-stakes environments, like school systems.
And what happens when that digital confidence, that feeling of we have the data, completely masks the fact that people don't know what to do with it?
This whole phenomenon, as the sources frame it, is governed by something called the LOTTA chicken principle.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. But
Right.
first, okay, let's unpack this.
To really get it, you have to go back to around 2016.
Okay.
It was a time of just immense technological promise, especially in education. You had districts rolling out these massive, very expensive, very sophisticated tools.
Like EVAAS.
Exactly. EVAAS, the Education Value-Added Assessment System from SAS.
I mean, even the name sounds so authoritative. What was a tool like EVA promising that, say, regular grades or standardized tests weren't?
Well, it was a huge conceptual leap forward. It wasn't just about measuring where a student is right now, that snapshot in time.
Right.
EVAS used these really complex algorithms to control for outside factors, like socioeconomic background. And its whole purpose was to predict a student's future academic achievement.
So not just how far they are, but how fast they could go.
Exactly right. The promise was that it could identify this hidden, untapped potential.
Especially in kids who, for whatever reason, might not have amazing test scores today.
Yes, it was supposed to be the great equalizer. The idea was to objectively place students into advanced courses, bypassing all those traditional, subjective sorting methods.
The ones that so often just overlooked students of color or kids from low-income families.
That was the goal.
That is a phenomenal promise. So if the tool existed, this statistically rigorous engine designed to find diamonds in the rough, why are we even having this conversation?
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me. If the tech was there, why did districts need to hire outside data experts just to look at the numbers?
Because the technology was a Ferrari, but the users, they didn't have a driver's license. The reality was this catastrophic gap between the promise of the software and the actual practical data literacy on the ground.
Even with state mandates, right? Weren't they required to use database decision-making for school improvement plans for grants?
Required, yes, but the foundational skills just weren't there.
How bad was it?
The skills gap was, it was stunningly basic. We're talking about dedicated, brilliant educators, experts in their fields.
Sure.
But you put them in front of a spreadsheet, and they couldn't do the simplest tasks. They couldn't filter columns, couldn't create a simple chart to see a trend.
So they were basically just typing in it.
That's it, using it like a typewriter.
And this technical inability, I'm guessing it protected a much deeper, more fundamental confusion. Which brings us to our first section, the confusion of data literacy.
Yes. Our sources describe this pervasive mental model where their staff were actively and consciously confusing demographic information with academic performance.
Wait, not just correlating them, but confusing them.
Equating them. For instance, they would see a student who qualified for free lunch and essentially treat that as the same data point as a student who couldn't read. They just blended them into one variable.
That is a critical distinction to miss. One is a circumstance you can't change, and the other is a skill you absolutely must change.
Absolutely. So to tackle this, the consultants ran these workshops they actually called apples and oranges sessions.
Okay, what did that look like?
The goal was to get staff to physically sort variables into two piles. On one side, things they could influence, reading skills, math practice. On the other, things they couldn't, family income, where a student lives.
And I'm guessing that wasn't a quick 10-minute exercise.
Oh no, it was met with genuine cognitive resistance. The sources say staff would struggle for hours, insisting that these variables were the same thing.
And there's an example in here that is just unbelievable.
The bus route.
Yeah. That the bus a student rode to school was functionally the same thing as their academic ability.
They were merging environment and aptitude into one single unchangeable metric.
Hold on. They were seriously arguing, you can't separate a kid's ability to learn from the physical vehicle that brings them to school. That's not just poor data literacy. That feels like the system actively resisting the possibility of change.
That is the LOTTA chicken principle in action.
Okay, let's define that.
If you believe the outcome is already determined by inputs you can't control, like where a kid lives, then the whole data process becomes theater. It's pointless.
Because if you can't separate a home address from a reading level in your mind, then writing measurable goals for growth becomes impossible. You've already accepted the bias as fact before you even start. So the stage is now perfectly set for failure, even with the best intentions. Which brings us to section 2, the grant, the goal, and the fake data.
Right. So into this environment of technical illiteracy and cultural confusion, a middle school gets a really important grant.
And the goal of this grant was ambitious and absolutely necessary.
It was to identify the top-performing, high-potential Black male students, get them into advanced math tracks, and give them these great enrichment electives.
And the number one rule was?
Selection must use objective data. Specifically, it had to be EVAAS.
The whole point was to break that old subjective sorting system that had been excluding these exact students for years.
Precisely. So this was the moment of truth. The external analyst shows up, ready to pull the real objective predictive EVAAS numbers.
Yeah.
The assistant principal, just beaming with pride, total confidence, walks in and hands over these thick stacks of printed Excel spreadsheets.
Okay.
And he says, this is our EVAAS. And that's the record stretch moment, because what he handed over, it wasn't EVAAS, it wasn't statistical predictive analytics at all.
What was it?
It was their old, highly subjective internal placement system, just impressions typed into rows and columns to create the appearance of analysis.
Impressions dressed up as analytics. Let's talk about those impressions, because this brings us to what might be the most absurd and damaging part of this whole story. Section 3, the angel to OMG scale.
Yes. There was a 1 to 4 scale typed into a cell for every single student.
Okay.
1 equaled angel.
Angel.
And 4, wait for it, 4 equaled OMG.
You cannot be serious.
Yeah.
Angel to OMG. I want you, the listener, to just picture that for a second. This is an official metric for a student's academic future.
It was the key metric they were using.
How much actual predictive data was alongside these labels?
0.
Nothing.
No test scores, no growth indicators, nothing that controlled for outside factors. It was purely gut feelings, codified into a spreadsheet.
It's the perfect illustration of the belief that if you just type your assumptions into rows and columns, you magically transform bias into data.
It's the lowest form of the LOTTA chicken principle.
And I imagine when the analyst took these sheets and just hit the filter button?
The pattern was immediate, it was stark, and it was utterly devastating.
What did it show?
Nearly every Black male student, the very kids the grant was designed to lift up, had been labeled a 4.
RG.
They had already been institutionally downgraded before the process even started. The subjective system, wearing a data costume, was actively preserving the status quo.
And it's amazing how little effort there was to even hide it, technically.
Well, it shows the sheer confidence they had that the spreadsheet format itself was a shield. Forget the content. The execution was sloppy. Staff were manually copying header rows across dozens of screens because no one knew how to freeze panes.
The most basic Excel function.
They weren't filtering, they weren't sorting, they were just printing out their feelings and calling it data.
That's the institutional magic trick, isn't it? The metaphor is perfect. You type an old assumption into a spreadsheet, it becomes an objective fact.
Right.
You arrange your gut feelings in rows and columns, suddenly they're predictive analytics. You wrap your bias in a printout, and it becomes evidence.
And the computer humming on the desk provides the perfect psychological cover. It gives everyone the comforting illusion that this was all done scientifically.
But the external team didn't stop there, which brings us to section 4, the institutional magic trick and the real cost.
Right. So after days of literally digging through server directories, bypassing the assistant principal's EVAAS, they finally found it.
The real data.
The real EVAAS data from the actual statistical system. And the truth in there was, frankly, far more shocking than the absurdity of the OMG scale.
What did the real data show?
It found 97 minority students who perfectly matched the program's target profile. Students with high predictive potential, strong growth trajectories, regardless of their current scores. These were the exact kids the old subjective system had nearly erased from existence.
97 kids whose futures were about to be decided by a system that couldn't tell the difference between angel and, oh my God.
And the human cost of that erasure is just immense. Our sources confirm that some of those 97 students, they were in the top 2% in math achievement in the entire state.
Top 2%. And they were not recommended by the school's OMG system.
Not recommended for the advanced track. That is a monumental failure of identification.
And because the grant had limits, budget, space, everything, They can only take 25 students.
Exactly. So only 25 of those 97 got into the program.
Which means 72 highly capable, top-performing minority students were left in standard or remedial classes.
Where they would likely never get the accelerated education they had earned, all because their potential was ignored and replaced by bias typed into a spreadsheet.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, in Section 5, the conclusion has to be that this system wasn't malfunctioning.
That is the profound realization here. The system was working exactly as it was intended to work.
How so?
It was preserving the old sorting hierarchies that are always favored certain kids, while at the same time giving the district the perfect alibi.
The comforting illusion that potential had been fairly scientifically evaluated by a fancy computer program.
Right. And you saw the vocabulary shift inside the schools. The computers were humming, the spreadsheets got thicker every year, and suddenly words like data-driven and evidence-based were everywhere.
But underneath that shiny professional surface,
The old taxonomy, the old assumptions remained completely untouched.
assumptions in, assumptions out.
That is the core finding. The confidence in the tool meant nothing because the inputs were just codified bias.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Whether you're in education or finance or HR, the lesson here is one of extreme vigilance.
You have to be able to distinguish between what is just data reporting, typing things into a document, and what is genuine data analysis.
Which requires critical thought, filtering, questioning where the numbers even came from.
Challenging the underlying assumptions.
Sources conclude with this really vital thought that goes way beyond just schools.
They argue that these institutions didn't fail because they lacked expensive data systems. They had the systems. They failed because they genuinely believed that typing their old beliefs and gut feelings into spreadsheets was the same thing as using actual evidence.
That is a powerful distinction.
And it raises an important question for you to consider. Take a look at your own professional life. Where is data theater happening right now?
Where is that institutional confidence in some high-tech tool, a shiny dashboard or a thick report, just masking a fundamentally subjective or biased input?
Because that gap, that space between the technical capability and the critical application, that's the real challenge of the digital age.